Frank Martinez rolled his wheelchair slowly down the sidewalk toward the big gray federal building. The morning sun was bright, and the city was already busy with people rushing to work. Cars filled the street, honking their horns as they moved. Through the heavy traffic, Frank had been awake since 5 in the morning getting ready for this important appointment. At 68 years old, Frank had seen many difficult days in his life. He lost both of his legs during the war in Vietnam many years ago. Since then, he had learned to live with his wheelchair, but some days were still hard. Today was one of those days when he needed help from the government office inside the federal building. Frank carried a small folder in his lap with all his important papers. He had his appointment letter, his veteran identification card, and his medical records. Everything was organized just the way the office had told him to bring it. He had called 3 times last week to make sure he had everything right. The federal building was tall and made of gray stone. Big windows covered the front and wide steps led up to the main entrance. Frank knew there was a ramp on the side for people in wheelchairs, so he headed in that direction. His hands were strong from years of pushing his wheelchair, but he moved carefully because the sidewalk was crowded with people. As Frank approached the side entrance, 2 security guards noticed him coming. The first guard was a tall man with dark hair named Danny Walsh. He wore a blue uniform with a shiny badge and had a serious look on his face. The second guard was shorter and heavier, named Kevin Brown. Both men watched Frank as he rolled up the ramp toward the door. Danny stepped forward and held up his hand. "Stop right there," he said in a loud voice. "Where do you think you're going?" Frank stopped his wheelchair and looked up at the guard. "Good morning," he said politely. "I have an appointment at 9:30 this morning. I have all my papers right here." He reached for his folder to show his appointment letter. Kevin moved closer and crossed his arms. "We don't care about your papers. You can't come in here without proper authorization." Frank felt confused. He opened his folder and pulled out his appointment confirmation letter. The paper was official and had the government seal at the top. "This is my appointment letter," Frank explained. "They sent it to me last week. See, it has today's date and time." Danny grabbed the letter from Frank's hand and barely looked at it. "This doesn't mean anything to us. We're in charge of security here and we say who gets in and who doesn't." "But I'm a veteran," Frank said, trying to stay calm. "I served in Vietnam. I lost my legs fighting for this country." He reached for his veteran identification card and held it up for the guards to see. Kevin laughed in a mean way. "So what? Lots of people say they're veterans. How do we know that card is real?" Frank's face showed his hurt feelings, but he kept trying to be respectful. "Sir, I just need to go to my appointment. I've been waiting 3 months for this meeting. They're going to help me with my medical benefits." Danny stepped even closer to Frank's wheelchair. His voice got louder and more angry. "Listen, old man, we told you that you can't come in here. Are you deaf or just stupid?" People walking by on the sidewalk started to notice the argument. Some of them slowed down to see what was happening. A woman in a nurse uniform stopped completely and watched with concern on her face. Frank tried one more time to explain. "Please, I just need 5 minutes to get inside. My appointment is very important. I take 3 buses to get here, and it's hard for me to travel." "We don't care about your problems," Kevin said rudely. "Find somewhere else to go beg for money." "I'm not begging," Frank said, his voice getting a little stronger. "I earned these benefits by serving my country. I have every right to be here." Danny's face turned red with anger. "Rights? You don't have any rights here. We're the ones with the authority, not some broken old man in a wheelchair." The words hurt Frank deeply, but he tried to stay dignified. He had faced worse things in his life, and he wasn't going to let these guards break his spirit. But Danny wasn't finished. He walked behind Frank's wheelchair and put his hands on the handles. "Since you won't leave on your own, we'll help you. Leave." "Don't touch my chair," Frank said firmly. "I can move by myself." Kevin stepped in front of Frank, blocking his path back to the sidewalk. "Too late for that now. You should have listened when we told you to go away." Danny began pushing Frank's wheelchair backward away from the building entrance. Frank tried to grab his wheels to stop the movement, but Danny was too strong. The wheelchair rolled backward faster and faster. "Stop!" Frank called out. "You're pushing me toward the street." But the guards didn't stop. Danny kept pushing harder, and Kevin walked alongside, making sure Frank couldn't turn the wheelchair in any other direction. Other people on the sidewalk stepped back, unsure of what to do. Some looked shocked, but no one tried to help. The busy street was getting closer. Cars were driving fast in both directions, and the morning traffic was heavy. Horns were honking and engines were loud. Frank could see the danger he was being pushed into. "Please stop," Frank shouted. "There are cars coming." Danny gave one final hard push. Frank's wheelchair rolled off the sidewalk and into the street, right into the path of the morning traffic. Cars had to swerve quickly to avoid hitting him. Brakes squealed and drivers honked their horns angrily. Frank found himself sitting in his wheelchair in the middle of the busy street. Cars were coming from both directions, and he couldn't move fast enough to get out of the way. His heart was beating fast and his hands shook as he tried to turn his wheelchair around. The nurse who had been watching ran into the street to help him. "Are you okay?" she called out as she dodged between the cars. Behind them, Danny and Kevin stood on the sidewalk, watching what they had done. They seemed satisfied with themselves, as if they had solved a problem. But Frank was in real danger now, trapped between moving cars with no easy way to get back to safety. The morning that had started with hope for Frank Martinez had quickly turned into a nightmare. All he wanted was to keep his appointment and get the help he had earned through his military service. Instead, he found himself fighting for his life in busy traffic, pushed there by the very people who were supposed to protect the federal building and the people who visited it. Lisa Adams was on her way to work at the hospital when she saw Frank Martinez being pushed into the street by the security guards. She wore white scrubs and carried a small purse over her shoulder. As a nurse, she was trained to help people in danger, and she didn't think twice about what to do next. Lisa ran into the busy street without caring about her own safety. Cars were still driving fast in both directions, and she had to wave her arms to make them slow down. "Stop! There's a man in a wheelchair," she yelled at the drivers. Frank was trying to turn his wheelchair around, but the wheels kept getting stuck between the painted lines on the road. His hands were shaking, and he could hear the cars getting closer. The noise of the traffic was so loud that he could barely think straight. "Don't worry, I'm here to help you," Lisa said as she reached Frank. She put her hands on the back of his wheelchair and began pushing him toward the sidewalk. A few drivers stopped their cars to let them pass safely. "Thank you," Frank said, breathing hard. "I don't know what just happened. Those guards just pushed me out here." Lisa helped Frank get back onto the sidewalk, away from the dangerous traffic. She knelt down beside his wheelchair to check if he was hurt. "Are you injured? Did you hit anything when they pushed you?" Frank looked at his hands. The palms were scraped and bleeding a little from trying to grab his wheelchair wheels to stop them from moving. "Just my hands," he said. "But I'm okay." Lisa opened her purse and took out some small bandages. As a nurse, she always carried first aid supplies with her. "Let me clean these cuts for you. They're not deep, but we need to make sure they don't get infected." While Lisa was taking care of Frank's hands, she looked up at the two security guards who were still standing by the federal building entrance. Danny and Kevin were watching them, but didn't come over to help or apologize. "What you did was wrong," Lisa called out to the guards. "This man could have been killed." Danny shrugged his shoulders. "He wouldn't leave when we told him to. That's his problem, not ours." "His problem?" Lisa stood up and walked toward the guards. "You pushed a disabled veteran into traffic. That's not security work. That's assault." Kevin stepped forward and pointed his finger at Lisa. "You better mind your own business, lady. We were just doing our job." "Your job is to protect people, not hurt them," Lisa said angrily. "This man has an appointment inside that building. He showed you his papers." "We don't care about his papers," Danny said. "We decide who gets in and who doesn't, and we decided he doesn't belong here." Frank rolled his wheelchair closer to where Lisa was arguing with the guards. "Please, I just want to go to my appointment. I've been waiting 3 months for this meeting." "You're not going anywhere," Kevin said. "You caused enough trouble already. If you don't leave right now, We're going to call the police and have you arrested? Frank felt scared and confused. He had never been treated this way before, especially not for trying to keep a government appointment. But I'm a veteran. I served in Vietnam. I lost my legs fighting for this country. We told you before, we don't care about that, Danny said. Lots of people lie about being in the military. How do we know you're telling the truth? Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Are you serious? Look at him. He's clearly a disabled veteran and he has identification cards to prove it. Across the street, a man in a business suit was watching everything from his office window. His name was Carl Johnson, and he owned a small insurance company on the third floor of the building across from the federal building. Carl had seen the whole incident from the beginning. Carl was so upset by what he saw that he left his office and came down to the street. He walked quickly across the busy road, dodging cars as he came to help Frank and Lisa. I saw everything that happened, Carl said as he approached the group. I watched from my office window. These guards pushed this man into traffic on purpose. Danny and Kevin looked nervous when they realized someone had been watching them. You don't know what you're talking about, Danny said. We were just following our security procedures. Security procedures? Carl pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the guards' name tags and badge numbers. I'm documenting this entire incident. What you did was criminal. You can't take pictures of us, Kevin said, trying to block Carl's phone with his hand. Yes, I can, Carl said firmly. This is a public sidewalk, and you two just committed assault. In front of witnesses. I'm making sure there's evidence of what happened here. By now, more people were starting to gather around. The morning crowd was getting bigger as people walked to work and saw the commotion. Some of them recognized Frank from the local Veterans of Foreign Wars meetings that were held downtown every month. An older man named Pete Garcia walked over to Frank. Pete was wearing a baseball cap that said, Vietnam Veteran on the front. Frank, what's going on here? Are you all right? Pete, Frank said, relieved to see a friendly face. These guards won't let me into the building for my appointment. They pushed me into the street. Pete looked at the two security guards with anger in his eyes. You did what? You pushed a disabled veteran into traffic? Stay out of this, old man, Danny warned. This doesn't concern you. It concerns every veteran, Pete said. He pulled out his cell phone and started making calls. I'm calling everyone I know. This is not how we treat people who served their country. Within minutes, Pete had called 3 other veterans who lived nearby. He also called the local Veterans Affairs office and the American Legion post. Word was spreading quickly that a veteran was being mistreated at the federal building. Lisa was still taking care of Frank's scraped hands when she decided to do something that would change everything. She took out her phone and started recording a live video on social media. This is Lisa Adams, and I'm standing outside the federal building downtown, she said into her phone camera. I just watched 2 security guards push a disabled Vietnam veteran into busy traffic because he wanted to keep his appointment inside this building. She turned the camera toward Frank, who was sitting quietly in his wheelchair. This is Frank Martinez. He served our country in Vietnam and lost both of his legs. He came here today for a medical benefits appointment, and these guards treated him like garbage. Then she pointed the camera at Danny and Kevin. These are the 2 guards who pushed him into the street. They're supposed to be protecting this federal building, but instead they're attacking the very people who fought to protect our freedom. The live video started getting comments and shares immediately. People watching online were outraged by what they were seeing. Within just a few minutes, hundreds of people had seen the video, and the number was growing fast. Danny and Kevin were getting more worried as the crowd grew bigger and more people started taking pictures and videos. They tried to get everyone to leave, but no one was listening to them anymore. All of you need to move along, Kevin said loudly. This is federal property, and you're all trespassing. The sidewalk is public property, Carl said. We have every right to be here, and we're not leaving until this man gets the respect he deserves. Frank sat in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by all the support he was receiving from strangers. He had only wanted to keep his appointment, but now, he found himself at the center of something much bigger. People were standing up for him in a way that reminded him why he had been proud to serve his country in the first place. Tony Rivera was sitting in his car when his phone rang. He was a retired staff sergeant who now worked as a mechanic at a garage downtown. Tony had served 2 tours in Iraq and knew what it meant to come home from war and need help from the government. "Tony, you need to get down to the federal building right now," Pete Garcia said on the phone. "They're treating Frank Martinez like dirt and we need backup." Tony didn't ask questions. He knew Pete wouldn't call unless it was serious. "I'm 5 minutes away," Tony said. He started his truck and drove toward the federal building as fast as he could. When Tony arrived, he saw the crowd that had gathered around Frank. Lisa Adams was still recording her live video, and more people were taking pictures with their phones. The 2 security guards looked nervous and angry at the same time. Tony walked straight to Frank and knelt down beside his wheelchair. "Frank, what happened here?" he asked. Frank explained everything while Tony listened carefully. Tony's face got more and more angry as he heard the story. When Frank finished talking, Tony stood up and looked at the security guards. "You pushed a disabled veteran into traffic?" Tony asked Danny and Kevin. "Are you out of your minds?" We're doing our job," Danny said, but his voice didn't sound as confident as before. Tony pulled out his phone and started making calls. The first call was to Maria Santos, who worked at the local Veterans Affairs office. Maria had helped Tony when he came back from Iraq, and she cared deeply about all veterans. "Maria, this is Tony Rivera," he said when she answered. "We have an emergency at the federal building. A disabled veteran was just assaulted by security guards and we need help right now." Maria was shocked when Tony told her what happened. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said, "and I'm bringing everyone I can find." Tony's second call was to the local American Legion post. The third call was to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. The fourth call was to a group of Marine veterans who met every week for coffee. By the time Tony finished making calls, help was coming from all over the city. While Tony was calling for backup, Lisa's live video was spreading like wildfire on social media. People were sharing it on Facebook, sending it through text messages, and posting it on Twitter. The comments were all angry about how Frank was being treated. One person wrote, "This is disgusting. How can they treat a veteran this way?" Another comment said, "These guards should be fired immediately." Someone else posted, "I'm sharing this everywhere. Everyone needs to see how our veterans are being treated." The video had been watched by over 1,000 people in just 15 minutes. Local news stations started getting phone calls and messages about the incident. News reporters were always looking for stories that would make people angry, and this story was perfect. Channel 7 News was the first to send a reporter. A young woman named Ashley Moore arrived with a camera operator. She immediately started interviewing people in the crowd to get the full story. "I saw the whole thing," Carl Johnson told the reporter. "Those guards pushed him right into traffic. If this nurse hadn't helped him, he could have been killed." Lisa Adams also talked to the reporter. "I'm a nurse, and I know what shock looks like. This man was terrified. He came here for help, and instead he got attacked. The security guards tried to avoid the news camera, but the reporter found them anyway. Can you explain why you pushed a disabled veteran into traffic?" "Ashley," Moore asked Danny. "No comment," Danny said, walking away from the camera. "Were you following proper security procedures?" the reporter asked Kevin. "We don't talk to the media," Kevin replied. But the damage was already done. The news story was being prepared, and it would be on television within an hour. Unknown to everyone at the federal building, something important was happening just 6 blocks away. Colonel Jack Bennett was at the federal courthouse for a military ceremony. Every month, the Army held a special event to honor soldiers who had died in service to their country. Colonel Bennett was a decorated officer who had served in Afghanistan. He believed strongly that veterans deserved respect and proper treatment when they came home from war. He had spent his whole career taking care of soldiers, and he didn't like hearing about veterans being mistreated. Captain Steve Miller was Colonel Bennett's aide. He was a young officer who handled the colonel's phone calls and appointments. Steve was checking his phone when he saw Lisa's live video that someone had shared on social media. Steve watched the video with growing concern. When he realized what had happened, he immediately went to find Colonel Bennett. "Sir, we have a situation," Steve said, showing the colonel his phone. "A disabled veteran is being mistreated by security guards at the Federal Building. It's happening right now, just a few blocks from here." Colonel Bennett watched the video and his face became very serious. "How long ago did this happen?" he asked. "The video went live about 20 minutes ago, sir. It looks like the situation is still ongoing." Colonel Bennett made a decision quickly. "Get the MPs ready. We're going to check this out." "How many MPs do you want, sir?" "All of them," the colonel said firmly. "If someone is mistreating a veteran, they're going to answer for it." Captain Miller immediately called the military police unit that was providing security for the ceremony. Within minutes, 6 MPs were ready to go. They got into their vehicles and prepared to drive to the Federal Building, but something even more important was about to happen. General Patricia Hayes had just finished speaking at the ceremony when Captain Miller approached her. "General, we have a situation involving a mistreated veteran," Captain Miller explained. "Colonel Bennett is responding, but I thought you should know." General Hayes was one of the highest-ranking officers in the area. She had worked her way up through the ranks over 25 years of service. She had commanded troops in combat and had always believed that taking care of veterans was one of the military's most important duties. "Show me," she said. Captain Miller played the video for the general. As she watched Frank being pushed into traffic, her face became very angry. "This is unacceptable," General Hayes said. "No veteran should be treated this way, especially not a disabled veteran who gave his legs for his country. Colonel Bennett is already heading there with MPs, ma'am." "Good. I'm going too. Get my car ready." Within minutes, a convoy of military vehicles was heading toward the Federal Building. Colonel Bennett was in the lead vehicle with 4 MPs. General Hayes was in the second vehicle with Captain Miller and 2 more MPs. Back at the Federal Building, the crowd was getting bigger. More veterans had arrived after Tony's phone calls. Maria Santos from the Veterans Affairs Office had arrived with 3 of her co-workers. The news reporter was interviewing more people, and several other news stations were sending reporters too. Frank was still sitting in his wheelchair, surrounded by all the people who had come to support him. He was grateful for their help, but he was also overwhelmed. All he had wanted was to keep his appointment, and now he was in the middle of a major incident. "I just want to go inside for my meeting," Frank said to Maria Santos. "Can you help me get past these guards?" "Don't worry about those guards," Maria said. "After what they did today, they won't be working here much longer." Danny and Kevin were standing near the building entrance, talking quietly to each other. They could see that the situation was getting out of control, and they were starting to worry about their jobs. "Maybe we should call our supervisor," Kevin said. "It's too late for that," Danny replied. "We're in big trouble now." They had no idea how right Danny was. In just a few minutes, their day was about to get much worse. The sound of military vehicles approaching could be heard from several blocks away. People in the crowd around Frank Martinez turned their heads to see where the noise was coming from. The engines were loud and powerful, different from regular cars and trucks. Colonel Jack Bennett sat in the front passenger seat of the lead military vehicle. He was wearing his full dress uniform with all his ribbons and medals. His face was serious as he watched the crowd of people gathered outside the Federal Building. "There must be 50 people there now," Captain Steve Miller said from the driver's seat. "This has turned into a major incident." "Good," Colonel Bennett replied. "When veterans are mistreated, people should be upset about it. That's how it should be." Behind them, 4 more military vehicles followed in a convoy. Each vehicle carried military police officers who were trained to handle serious situations. The MPs were also wearing their dress uniforms because they had been at the ceremony before this emergency call. As the military convoy got closer to the Federal Building, people on the sidewalk started pointing and talking excitedly. Some of them took out their phones to record the military vehicles arriving. Frank was still sitting in his wheelchair, surrounded by the people who had come to support him. He heard the military vehicles but didn't think they were coming for him. "I wonder what's happening," he said to Maria Santos from the Veterans Affairs Office. I don't know, Maria replied, but it looks like something important. The first military vehicle pulled up to the curb right in front of the federal building. Colonel Bennett got out first, followed by Captain Miller and 4 military police officers. The MPs immediately began forming a line to control the crowd and create space. People in the crowd recognized the military uniforms and ranks. Many of them were veterans themselves, and they knew that high-ranking officers didn't show up unless something serious was happening. Danny Walsh and Kevin Brown, the 2 security guards, saw the military officers approaching and became very nervous. They had never dealt with military police before and they didn't know what to expect. Why are they here? Kevin whispered to Danny. I don't know, but this can't be good for us, Danny whispered back. Colonel Bennett walked through the crowd with authority and confidence. People moved aside to let him pass. His uniform was perfectly pressed and his medals caught the sunlight. He looked like exactly what he was, a career military officer who commanded respect. When Colonel Bennett reached Frank Martinez, he stopped and looked down at the elderly veteran in the wheelchair. Frank looked up at the colonel with surprise and confusion. Are you Frank Martinez? Colonel Bennett asked in a clear, strong voice. Yes, sir. I am, Frank replied. But I don't understand why you're here. I'm here because of how you were treated. Today? The colonel said. I heard that security guards pushed you into traffic, is that true? Frank nodded his head. Yes, sir. I just wanted to keep my appointment, but they wouldn't let me in the building. Then they pushed my wheelchair right into the street with cars coming. Colonel Bennett's face became very angry. He turned to look at the 2 security guards who were standing about 20 feet away. Which guards? He asked Frank. Frank pointed to Danny and Kevin. Those 2 men over there. Colonel Bennett signaled to his military police officers. Sergeant. Major Torres, I need you to interview these witnesses and document everything that happened here today. Sergeant Major Rick Torres was a tough-looking MP with 20 years of experience. He immediately began organizing the other MPs to start taking statements from people in the crowd. But then something even more dramatic happened. The crowd heard more military vehicles approaching. This time, the vehicles were larger and more impressive. A black military car with small flags on the front arrived, followed by 2 more vehicles full of military police. General Patricia Hayes stepped out of the black car, and everyone immediately knew she was someone very important. She wore a general's uniform with 4 stars on her shoulders. Her presence commanded instant respect from everyone present, including Colonel Bennett. General Hayes, Colonel Bennett said, saluting his superior officer. Colonel Bennett, General, Hayes replied, returning the salute. Brief me on the situation. Ma'am, Mr. Frank Martinez is a disabled Vietnam veteran who was assaulted by federal security guards while trying to keep an appointment. The guards pushed his wheelchair into traffic, endangering his life. General Hayes looked at Frank Martinez, sitting in his wheelchair. Her expression softened as she saw the elderly veteran with his scraped hands and worried face. What happened next surprised everyone in the crowd. General Hayes, one of the highest-ranking military officers in the region, walked over to Frank and knelt down beside his wheelchair so they could talk at eye level. Mr. Martinez, she said gently, I am General Patricia Hayes. I want to personally apologize for what happened to you today. What those guards did was completely unacceptable. Frank was so surprised that he didn't know what to say at first. In all his years as a veteran, no general had ever spoken to him personally, let alone apologize to him. Thank you, ma'am, Frank finally said. I just wanted to keep my appointment. I've been waiting 3 months for this meeting about my medical benefits. You will keep that appointment, General Hayes said firmly, and you will be treated with the respect that every veteran deserves. The general stood up and turned to face the crowd. Her voice became louder so everyone could hear her clearly. This man served our country in Vietnam, she announced. He lost both of his legs fighting for the freedom that we all enjoy today. Anyone who mistreats a veteran is answering to the United States military. The crowd began clapping and cheering. Many people had tears in their eyes as they watched the general defend Frank. General Hayes then turned her attention to the 2 security guards. Danny and Kevin looked terrified as the general approached them with several military police officers. Are you the 2 guards who pushed this veteran into traffic? she asked in a stern voice. We were just following procedures, Danny said weakly. Procedures? General Hayes replied. What procedure tells you to push a disabled veteran into moving? Traffic? Kevin tried to explain. He didn't have proper authorization to enter the building. He had an appointment letter and veteran identification, General Hayes said. That is proper authorization. What you did was assault. Sergeant Major Torres stepped forward with his notebook. Ma'am, I need to interview these guards as part of our investigation. Do it, General Hayes ordered. I want a complete report on everything that happened here today. While the military police began questioning Danny and Kevin, General Hayes returned to Frank Martinez. The crowd watched as she knelt down beside his wheelchair again. Mr. Martinez, I'm going to personally make sure you get inside that building for your appointment, she said. And I'm going to make sure you're treated properly by everyone inside. Thank you, General, Frank said. I never expected anything like this to happen. It shouldn't have happened, General Hayes replied. But I'm glad we were here to make it right. Captain Miller approached the general with his phone. Ma'am, the news stations are asking for a statement about what happened here. General Hayes thought for a moment. Tell them that the United States military will always defend veterans who have served our country. Anyone who mistreats a veteran is making an enemy of every person in uniform. The news reporters in the crowd wrote down every word the general said. This story was becoming bigger than anyone had expected. Lisa Adams, the nurse who had first helped Frank, was still recording everything on her phone. Her live video now had thousands of viewers watching the military response to Frank's mistreatment. The comments on her video were full of praise for the military officers and anger at the security guards. People were sharing the video all over social media, and it was becoming one of the most talked about stories of the day. Frank Martinez sat in his wheelchair, overwhelmed by everything that was happening around him. When he woke up that morning, all he wanted was to keep a simple appointment. Now he found himself at the center of a major incident involving generals, military police, news reporters, and hundreds of people on social media. But for the first time since the security guards had pushed him into traffic, Frank felt safe and respected. The military had come to defend him, and he remembered why he had been proud to serve his country all those years ago. General Patricia Hayes looked at Frank Martinez sitting in his wheelchair and made a decision that would change everything. She turned to Captain Steve Miller and gave him clear instructions. Captain Miller, I want you to personally escort Mr. Martinez into that building for his appointment. Make sure he receives priority treatment from every single person inside. Yes, ma'am, Captain Miller replied. Should I wait with him during his meeting? Yes. Stay with him the entire time. If anyone gives him any trouble at all, you call me immediately. Frank couldn't believe what he was hearing. A few hours ago, security guards had pushed him into traffic. Now a general was personally making sure he got the help he needed. General, you don't have to do all this for me, Frank said. I just wanted to keep my appointment. General Hayes smiled at Frank for the first time since she arrived. Mr. Martinez, you gave your legs for this country. The least we can do is make sure you get the benefits you earned. The general stood up and faced the federal building. She walked toward the entrance with Frank's wheelchair beside her, and Captain Miller following behind them. The crowd of people moved aside to make a clear path. The military police officers formed a line on both sides, creating an honor guard for Frank as he finally entered the building he had been trying to reach all morning. People in the crowd began clapping and cheering as they watched Frank get the respect he deserved. Inside the federal building, word had already spread about what was happening outside. The building manager, a woman named Helen Clark, was waiting in the lobby when General Hayes arrived with Frank. General Hayes, Helen said nervously, I want to apologize for what happened outside our building today. This is not how we treat veterans. No, it's not, General Hayes replied firmly. And I expect you to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. We're already taking action, Helen said quickly. The 2 security guards have been suspended immediately. We're also reviewing all of our security procedures. General Hayes nodded. Good. Mr. Martinez has an appointment that he's been waiting 3 months to keep. I want him to receive the best service your office can provide. Of course, General. We'll take care of everything right away. Frank was taken to the front of the line for his appointment. Normally, people had to wait for hours to be seen, but today was different. The staff treated Frank like he was the most important person in the building. Captain Miller stayed with Frank during his entire appointment, just as General Hayes had ordered. The government workers were very helpful and made sure all of Frank's paperwork was processed correctly. They approved his medical benefits and set up regular payments to help with his healthcare costs. "Is there anything else we can do for you, Mr. Martinez?" the benefits specialist asked. "This is more than enough," Frank replied. "Thank you for treating me so well." While Frank was inside having his meeting, important things were happening outside the building. Sergeant Major Torres and the other military police officers were finishing their investigation of the incident. Danny Walsh and Kevin Brown had been questioned separately about their actions. Both guards admitted to pushing Frank into traffic, but they tried to claim they were following security procedures. "There is no security procedure that allows you to push a disabled person into traffic," Sergeant Major Torres told them. "What you did was assault, and it could have been much worse." The MPs had also interviewed all the witnesses, including Lisa Adams, Carl Johnson, Pete Garcia, and Tony Rivera. Everyone told the same story about how the guards had mistreated Frank and endangered his life. General Hayes received the full report from Sergeant Major Torres while Frank was still in his appointment. The report confirmed everything she had suspected about the incident. "Ma'am, the evidence is clear," Sergeant Major Torres said. "These guards assaulted a disabled veteran without any justification. They put his life in danger." "What do you recommend?" General Hayes asked. "Criminal charges should be filed. This was not just poor judgment. This was deliberate harm to a veteran." General Hayes agreed. She immediately called the local police department and the federal prosecutor's office to report what had happened. By the end of the day, Danny Walsh and Kevin Brown would be facing serious criminal charges. But General Hayes wasn't finished. She also called the company that provided security for the federal building. The company's regional manager arrived within an hour to meet with the general. "General Hayes, I want to assure you that this company does not tolerate the mistreatment of veterans," the manager said. "I hope not," General Hayes replied, "because if it happens again, your company will lose this contract immediately." "We understand completely. We're implementing new training for all our guards about working with veterans and disabled individuals." Meanwhile, the story was spreading far beyond the local area. Lisa Adams' live video had been watched by over 50,000 people. News stations across the country were picking up the story about how military leadership had defended a mistreated veteran. The video showed General Hayes kneeling beside Frank's wheelchair and personally apologizing to him. It showed military police questioning the guards who had pushed Frank into traffic. Most importantly, it showed how quickly the military responded when one of their own was in trouble. Social media was full of comments praising General Hayes and the other military officers. People were sharing the video with messages like, "This is how you treat veterans," and "Thank you to our military leaders for standing up for what's right." When Frank finished his appointment, Captain Miller escorted him back outside. General Hayes was waiting for them in the lobby of the federal building. "How did everything go, Mr. Martinez?" she asked. "Perfect," Frank replied with a big smile. "They took care of everything. My benefits are approved and they're going to help me with my medical costs." "Excellent. That's exactly what should have happened 3 months ago when you first applied." General Hayes walked outside with Frank to where the crowd was still gathered. Many people had stayed to see how the situation would end. When they saw Frank come out with a smile on his face, they started clapping again. Frank looked around at all the people who had supported him. There was Lisa Adams, the nurse who had saved him from traffic. There was Carl Johnson, who had documented everything that happened. There was Pete Garcia and Tony Rivera and all the other veterans who had come to help him. "I want to thank everyone," Frank said to the crowd. "When I woke up this morning, I just wanted to keep my appointment. I never expected all this support." General Hayes stepped forward to address the crowd one final time. "What happened here today should never happen to any veteran. But it also shows that when we work together, we can make sure justice is done." She turned to look at Frank. Mr. Martinez, if you ever have any problems getting the services you've earned, you call me directly. No veteran should have to go through what you went through today. Frank felt tears in his eyes. Thank you, General. Thank you for everything. As the crowd began to break up, people came over to shake Frank's hand and thank him for his service. Many of them exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. The story didn't end that day. Over the next few weeks, the federal building implemented new policies for treating veterans. Danny Walsh and Kevin Brown were fired from their jobs and faced criminal charges. The security company provided special training for all their guards about working with disabled veterans. Frank Martinez became a symbol of how veterans should be treated with dignity and respect. His story was told in newspapers and on television shows across the country. But more importantly, real changes were made to prevent other veterans from facing the same mistreatment. General Hayes kept her promise to Frank. She made sure he had her direct phone number, and she checked on him regularly to make sure he was getting all the services he needed. She also worked with other military leaders to create better support systems for veterans throughout the region. Frank never forgot the day when everything went wrong but then went right because good people stood up for what was correct. He often told the story to other veterans, reminding them that they were not alone and that there were people who would fight for them when they needed help. The incident at the federal building proved that respect for veterans was not just words, but actions, and that sometimes it takes strong leadership to make sure justice is served for those who served their country.